Elliot's office was located on the 6th floor of a 37-story building. Measuring 6 feet in length and 8 feet in width, it was a cramped space that held a single desk, a well-used rolling chair, a small plastic plant, and a company-issued work computer. The walls were an ever-present flat grey. It was the kind of grey that made it difficult for observers to focus on, with a shade that could cause physical pain and leave observers desperate for visual stimulation. The only reprieve from the assault on the senses was a small painting on the wall to Elliot's left. 3 large clouds and a cool blue atmosphere as far as the eye could see. Inoffensive, but nothing special. Elliot had nothing to do with this picture. In fact, an identical picture hung in the office of every worker on this floor. Much like the real sky, this picture had existed since long before he started working, and would remain long after he'd moved on. Elliot peeked through the tiny window in his office door. The cubicles that occupied the middle of this floor were full of employees hard at work. The coast was clear. He knew he would be reprimanded for this action if caught. Due to a record number of suicides in recent years, all windows were supposed to have been sealed shut. They had neglected to secure his window, and he didn't dare let that become common knowledge. He often wondered if there was a clerical error in a database, as a lot of things surrounding his office life were neglected by the company. His plastic plant was an outdated miniature fern, while every other office had been updated to a faux monstera last winter. His walls were 2 shades of grey behind the current brand-friendly shade. Even his frequent requests for updated hardware had been ignored. His monitor had a tendency to flicker, and his keyboard was the only one in the building that wore a discoloured yellow finish instead of a sleek matte black. He directed his thoughts away from this and back to sensations, sounds, and smell the now open window provided. Whilst it might not seem like much, he couldn't resist the way it affected him. The feeling was all that kept him going as his body went into autopilot. Spreadsheets, emails, shortcuts, whatever it took to carry out his overseer's orders. While he started off productive, by midday his productivity slowed significantly. He found himself distracted by his thoughts, as he so often did. The sounds and smells filtering through his open window washed over him, leaving great adventures and faraway lands free to take over his mind and transport him away from his drab office. With his focus unequally split between his work and his imagination, Elliot was too distracted to hear what was going on mere feet away. Elliot turned around, and his eyes met a peculiar sight. There, standing on the windowsill, was a large black bird, just under a foot tall, with pristinely preened feathers and 2 beady eyes which pierced his own.
Don't say I'm a crow. I'm not a crow. A brewer's blackbird. Euphagus cynosyphilis? We're native all throughout North America and Europe. We're pretty common. Surely you must have heard of us.
Elliot, still at a loss for words, could only shake his head.
You don't get out much, do you?
I don't.
The point is, everyone thinks I'm a crow. It's the first thing they say to me. I'm pretty sick of it. So I'm just helping you out here. You should really be thanking me.
Thank you?
The bird stared daggers at Elliot, looking as annoyed as one can as a 10.5-inch tall avian.
Are you always this insufferable?
No, sorry, I've just never talked to a bird before.
Elliot, realizing he was still standing, sat down sheepishly.
That doesn't matter. You have to go. I have work to do.
Elliot gestured towards his computer screen, as if his Excel document held all the proof in the world. If either one of them had looked close enough, they'd see the document was mostly composed of random key presses.
Elliot, you're not fooling anyone. It's okay, I won't take up too much of your time. Just relax.
How do you know my name? Never mind, I don't care. Just get out of here. I don't want to get in trouble.
Can you please just remain civil? You're not going to get into trouble. Pretty much nobody ever checks on you. See, I've been watching you for quite a while, Elliot. I know a lot about you. Enough to know that you don't have work to do.
I have.
True, you're right, you do have work to do. But you don't really do it, do you? Most of the time I see you, you're just zoned out in front of an unmoving screen.
Elliot didn't have a response to this. The bird was right.
But that's fine, because nobody here really cares about you all that much, right? Stop me if I'm wrong.
They weren't.
So then why exactly are you here? You're not respected here, you're not happy, you're not gaining anything. Besides what I assume is just enough of a paycheck to scrape by.
Well, I don't really have a choice, you know?
You do have a choice. A lot of people don't have that luxury. You know that?
Oh, really? What do you know about my life? You're just a bird, an animal. You don't have the faintest idea about taxes or rent or even about society as a whole.
Just because I'm an outsider.
Elliot wondered if the bird had received some form of formal education, but decided against asking it.
Additionally, being an animal, as you so eloquently put it, leaves me with my own challenges and knowledge that you just might benefit from having.
No. Leave.
Did you know the brewer's blackbird is a migratory bird? We're very rare out here on the East Coast. Usually we stick to the West and Middle Americas, flying south every winter to keep warm. I don't really do that. I do my own thing. The way I see it, that's what you need to do.
This speech was sounding suspiciously rehearsed to Elliot. Was this sort of confrontation a common occurrence in its life? A hobby? A job? Can birds get jobs?
You're stationary, you're stagnant, in a bad place. But you refuse to do anything about it.
Elliot had had enough. He reached out and gently pushed the bird back towards the open window.
You need to...
In a flash, the bird bit into his hand between his thumb and index finger.
Gah!
The bird once again stared daggers into Elliot, who looked back with indignation.
You're being very rude right now. Do you know that? I'm saying this stuff to help you. I can leave if that's what you truly want. Think about it, though, because if I leave...
I don't care!
You should, because...
Go! Leave!
I really did come here to help you. I knew you wouldn't want to hear what I had to say, but I felt like you needed to. But fine, since you're so against hearing me out, I'll just leave you with this. This is what's going to happen. You're going to continue rejecting anything that challenges your worldview. You're going to remain in the rut you've created for yourself. You can easily escape, but you'll keep finding excuses. You're going to be blind to this fault, continue being miserable, and blame everything on everyone else. You're going to live your shitty life in this disgusting office, taking the safest option at every confrontation. All those problems you complain about, they're your own fault. You're living in the greatest age of humanity, in one of the wealthiest countries on the planet, surrounded by options. You have infinite possibilities at your disposal. So why don't you fucking act like it?
The cold wind whipped Elliot's face as he power-walked down the street. Like most of his walks, cheap headphones pumped music into his head. But unlike most of his walks, he paid it almost no attention, electing instead to mull over the events that had transpired at work. Soon after the bird left his office, Elliot claimed sickness and did the same. Everyone avoided his gaze as he left. At first he assumed it was due to his apparent sickness, but he soon suspected the walls were not as sound isolating as he had expected. He was almost positive his shouting would be spoken about throughout the building for days to come. Elliot tried his best to push the bird's visit out of his mind for the remainder of his journey home. Elliot couldn't sleep that night. He couldn't get the bird's words out of his head. It didn't help that he had done nothing but stare at the television since he got home. His mind was alight with imagined conversation, things he should have said, things that were said to him, things left unsaid. He couldn't tear his thoughts away. Sure, his job wasn't the best, but it was stable. He made good money and had the reassurance that he would always have a place to work. Job security like that was hard to come by, especially in today's economy. Did this bird really expect him to just drop everything? And what then? Go where? Why? Because this one bird doesn't like flying south for the winter. You can't compare the lives of birds to the lives of humans. This bird had no idea what his life was like. He couldn't just abandon it. Elliot had people that relied on him. Plus, he was only 34. It's not like he was trapped forever. He could go back to school or travel around or get a new job any time he wanted. It just made the most sense to stay put for now. He's just filling out his resume and earning money, both smart things that will help him in the future. After what seemed like hours, Elliot drifted asleep, nearly convinced he was making the right choices in life. By the time morning rolled around, everything felt unreal to Elliot. He moved through his morning on autopilot. He didn't remember walking to work, just the slow elevator ride once he arrived. He didn't know what time he ultimately fell asleep at, but he couldn't have gotten more than a couple of hours rest. Elliot was finally pulled back into the present when he felt a cold breeze wash over him. In his rush to leave, he had left his office window wide open, and it had remained that way all night. The room was frigid and felt slightly damp. The shock to his senses had awoken him fully. He was able to look around the familiar room for the first time in what felt like forever. In a way, this was all his. The emails, the chair, the meaningless picture on the wall. This was familiar. This was safe. If Elliot had looked close enough, he would have noticed what had been taken from him. But he was too wrapped up in his own thoughts of autonomy and security to see clearly. Elliot stood up and closed the window, possibly for good. He then returned to his little world and began to work. His cold, inoffensive, grey, confined world. Far away, another creature surveyed its own tiny world. The bird, who actually was a crow, had built its life on the other side of the city. Tucked away under a rooftop air ventilation shaft was an extravagant nest of tightly weaved sticks, wires, roots, scrap paper, and grass. It was almost 3 feet in diameter, decorated with various trinkets, trophies, and prizes. Pens, coins, stones, soda can tabs, and even a still functional wristwatch was woven into one of the walls. At the center was a neatly stacked pyramid of keyboard keys, each one labeled ESC, and each one a sleek matte black, with the exception of a discolored yellow key crowning the top.